I think the Latin American person is very relational. It's very about like how can we extend our family beyond ourselves, very unit based, right? And I think, and it's just so funny because you come to a culture of filmmaking, and that's what it is. It's all about how as a unit we can move because it's such a collaborative process.
Yeah.
You can't just individually move
Do it by
through
yourself. Yeah. My name is Nathan Johnson, and I'm here with Emilio. He works in development, working on like scripts and screenplays, and yeah, a lot of good stuff. So thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Happy to be here. Happy
Awesome.
to talk about stuff.
For sure. So yeah, so let's just kind of like start at the beginning. What kind of got you interested in storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a kid being like, and that's how it always starts, I think, for anybody that truly has grown a passion for storytelling. It's a very infant thing, right?
Yeah.
I grew up moving around a lot in Latin America and just kind of like being a lonely kid, but being a very social person. It was almost like, where can I find that sort of escapism? And I found it in movies. You know, I remember the first time, maybe not the first time, but I remember like being obsessed with like Toy Story and the idea of friendship and the idea of being in something together. And I think it really stemmed from really early on, those kind of like movies that move you that way. I remember getting older and watching Dead Poets Society with my dad and being like, man, how can I like be happy and sad at the same time? This is crazy. You know, and it felt like film was the only way to convey such a holistic approach to story. You know, you have the music, you have the acting, you have the visuals, and everything combined conveys an emotion so strongly that I was like, you know, and I didn't grow up being an athlete or like the typical things that you are in school. And so it just felt like this is the one thing that maybe I can be good at and want to pursue. And
That's
so
awesome.
I think it's stemmed from a lot of that.
Yeah. I think it's really cool because awesome. I think a lot of times it's you see something out there and it's like, oh, well, I can reach that. I can do that. I can do this.
Right.
And I think it's kind of similar for me for storytelling. It's one of those things that's so engaging and it's so like cross-cultural and it's able just to influence people in so many different ways. And it has so much meaning to us as people. So
I think it penetrates the deepest parts of like who we are, especially growing up. You know, I think growing up is such a jarring experience that people don't talk about it like that, but it is. And any way that we can relate to other people. And I think that was kind of the big thing for me is like I saw myself in some of these characters. I remember even watching Treasure Planet, which nobody talks about, by the way, but I love Treasure Planet. Just the world they created and that character of Jim and like coming of age and having an absent father and that whole, you know, just relate to certain themes of that, you know. I grew up in Guatemala. You know, it's a third world country. And so for me growing up, the idea of being part of the arts was never possible. I think, you know, I've been very blessed to be able to move here and to pursue that. But growing up, it was just never in the realm of possibilities. You could be, I come from a big, long line of teachers and pastors and seminary professors. And so for me, it was like, you can be a lawyer, a teacher, or a doctor.
That's it.
Take your pick. But it's just not, it was never something that I found appealing for me. It was always like, I want to be involved in I think in filmmaking and in storytelling in that way. And so growing up, it was just never part of that. But it's funny because I think we're very relational people. I think the Latin American person is very relational. It's very about like, how can we extend our family beyond ourselves, very unit based, right? And I think, and it's just so funny because you come to a culture of filmmaking and that's what it is. It's all about how as a unit we can move because it's such a collaborative process. You can't just individually move
Do it by
through
yourself.
it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think that was such a perk, you know, being accepted to film school, going to film school with that culture background of like, it's not just about me. It's not just about a director. It's not just about an actor. It's about all of us collaborating and making something together.
Yeah. I think it makes it so much more meaningful too when you can work with other people. Yeah, that's really awesome, man. Cool. So tell me a little bit about kind of what you're doing now, because you're working now in like development, right?
Yeah. So I work for a company called Yoruba Saxon. David and Jessica Oyelowo lead it. And it was interesting, I think, going out of college, thinking like you can be a producer independently, you can direct independently, or, you know, you can kind of become one of the numbers in the unions.
Yeah.
That was kind of like the options presented to me. But through internships and whatnot, I found myself in development, and it was an interesting world because it definitely moved in a slower pace. The schedules were out of the way, the budgets were out of the way somewhat, and it was all very focused on story. And it was like I never considered myself a writer. I tried it out. I get too much in my head. I tried directing, but I was so focused on others in the crew that producing felt like a very natural progression to what I wanted to do. But then I think finding myself in development and reading scripts and what makes a script good, what makes a script sellable, what makes a script appealing, became much of just a curiosity for me. And so coming out of college, stepping into this role, it's been interesting because I stepped into it also in the middle of a pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so things were changing in real time, and so it was almost like it gave me sort of an edge as well, because that's the only world I know is sort of this confusing post-pandemic world. But yeah, I really enjoy it. I think reading scripts, knowing how to package them well, what makes a script appealing to a buyer or to a studio outside of certain like constraints is really interesting.
Yeah. So what are you looking for usually when you're?
Yeah, I mean, usually I think for me personally, it's become a lot of like, because as much as development as I'm doing, I'm also looking at independent projects. 2 years ago, I was given the opportunity to produce a feature for an extremely low budget, and that was also an interesting experience, because there you kind of have to throw everything away except for the bare bones of like what makes this makeable and be a good story still, right? And I think in both cases, both in like the independent realm of filmmaking and in the studio realm of like, hey, $1 million per episode, is character. I think bottom line for me, if you don't have solid characters, it's really hard to track. It's really hard to even make a world if you don't have someone living in it. So I think more often than not, as much as we are looking for like, oh, these themes are important or these themes are not important, for me, it's always about character, about a character that is appealing, that
something relatable.
Casts a wide net. And I think that's the other thing about this kind of cultural moment that we're at is, we used to have almost like just 3 types of characters or 5 types of characters where everybody had to fit that box to relate. Now it's like the world's big, you go to Netflix and you're watching shows from Spain and Korea and South America. Now you can kind of relate to everybody, right? And so now it's become, and I think that's a good thing, but it's also now become a challenge of like that character still needs to be that relatable.
Yeah, it's like how do you take something that's a different culture and make that relatable even like to a U.S. audience? Yeah. And like the cross-pollinating, which I think is cool, because I think a lot of times storytelling is at its core, it's very human. So it does translate across different cultures. And I think it can be sometimes a little easier, but then sometimes it's harder because it's like, oh, well, we don't get this joke, or we don't get this.
There's certain thresholds you need to cross to get to the relatability. Yeah, and we deal with a lot at the company that I'm currently at. We deal with a lot of like African culture or African American culture and every connotation that has, right? We're not interested in the trauma story, the prison story, the absent father story. That's not really what we're about. We're about like, why can't you have an ET with a black boy, right? And that to me has become so important of working there, because as a Latino, like, you look at the polls and all the statistics. Most of the American going to the theater audience is Latino, and I love that, and because awesome. Because it's true. I think for us, we've always been so about that, about entertainment and about laughing and about being together, that the theater experience is that. And so for me, it's like, but I still haven't to this day seen a Marvel character where I'm like, that's me though. Yeah, you know what I mean? I haven't seen the Joaquin Phoenix of acting where I'm like, but he's Latino though, right? But there's a market for it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of been another big thing with this company, and also just in my own personal pursuit of stories of like, we don't have to stereotype. We don't have to put in boxes what we think people belong to, because we all have similar experiences. And it goes back to what we were talking about of like, we want to watch things that we feel really related to.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of possibility for that.
Fantastic. Yeah. What does an average day look like for you?
Yeah.
You know,
it's definitely a lot of reading.
Yeah.
And I think,
do the scripts are like they submitted to you? Like, where did the scripts come from?
Yeah. So usually, depending on the company, depending on like what position you're in, sometimes it is more about direct relationships, you know, like I know you, so you could send me something directly. But a lot of times it comes through agencies. You know, agencies still run this
the business,
this business.
Yeah.
So agencies will go, what is kind of like your MO? What are you looking for? And we frame it as simplest as possible, and then we start receiving scripts. Yeah, and that's both the blessing and the curse, because to one end, it's like, okay, we're interested in this particular type of story with these particular characters. Then it's like a flood of just that.
Just that, yeah.
But, you know.
And there might be some great stories that are like not in that framework. And
Dude,
you're like,
it's
like, this is good, but not what we're looking for.
Well, it's just like, especially when you start to frame it certain ways, like cliches start to seep in, right? And it's like, man, I feel like I've been reading the same script for like a whole month, and it can be like a myriad of scripts, but it still feels like the same script because it's just so cookie cutter right? So yeah, that's been an interesting part. You know, I think growing up and even in college, I was never an avid reader. That was never something that someone could say about me.
Yeah.
But it's slowly become a thing of that just the job requires it, right? You're reading scripts left and right, trying to sift through like who's a good writer, who's a good fit, how can we use this writer for, you know, what project, is this a good project itself? So a lot of the day is spent reading writers, and then kind of just discussing them. Right.
So do you discuss it with the group of people? Like when you say, well, when you find a script, you're like, I really like this, then what's the next step for you then?
Yeah. So finding a script, and I think, and really is a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
It really is like this golden nugget in the river where you're like, this is good.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing is oftentimes when you're in a culture of like, we're doing this together, as I have been in the, you know, our company's pretty small, and I think I lean towards that often, not only just in my work professionally, but also just independently whenever I'm looking for projects to produce or friends approach me with projects. It's a very selective number of people that we all can agree, like, this is a good story, this is what we're looking for, and this is how we want to approach it. So when you find a script, you can more than certainly feel like other people will feel the same. And I think that's it's a nice feeling, right? Because it's almost like, hey guys, I found it.
Yeah. It's like, come on, we found it. Yeah.
So both in my job and I think just in independent producing, it has been the case of like finding those nuggets of like, this is really good. This is something that is worth pursuing. And then, you know, it becomes kind of contagious. And I think it's almost like you sift and you sift and you sift to find that. But once you find that, it's just contagious, right? Everybody can be pretty heavily involved. The thing with development, I think in general in the business, like you might feel that way, your immediate group of people might feel that way, but then the desks, right. Like might not. And that's just kind of like the disappointment and sort of balance that you have to have with development is you're not just to find money, to find whatever you need to make those projects. You need everybody to be on board. Yeah. And that oftentimes can be political. It can oftentimes be, just
different
economy
perspectives,
thing.
different things. Yeah, there's so many factors that go into making it. Yeah,
right.
Which I think is challenging. I think especially with like the bigger the film is, the more challenging it is to get it made. Yeah. Just because there's so many hands, there's so many cooks that have to people have to sign off on it. Like so many people have to approve it, and it can be a challenge. Exactly. Yeah. But I think it's worth it when you, like you said, when you do find that amazing script.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was one. I think I've only had in my 4 or 5 years of internships and jobs and stuff, there's been one script that I think has gotten made that I read probably my first year of an internship, and I read it and I was like, this is amazing. And all of the other interns and like assistants were like, yeah, this is great. That I've seen like actually get made. And I actually haven't seen the movie, so I don't know if it's any good. It's pretty recent. But that's kind of like, you know, they call it development limbo for a reason. You know, it's a very slow process of everybody agreeing like this is worth making. Let's tweak this and that for either political reasons or business reasons to finally make a product.
Yeah. So do you guys, when you guys do end up choosing a project, do you end up working with the writer, or you guys generally like take it on yourselves, and like how does that handoff sort of work?
That's kind of the nice thing is project by project.
Okay.
You know, if there's like a book, for example, so you option the book and then you find a writer to do the screenplay, then you find a director, and it kind of snowballs from there. Oftentimes, you know, I think it's in our interest to find writer directors. I wrote this and I want to direct it. More in the independent space, but I do think that's still true for the studio space.
Yeah. I think that definitely helps to have like a cohesive vision, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like a singular voice is people want that.
Yeah.
It feels organic, and it does definitely translates once you see it on screen of like this feels like one person, right? Or one vision of something. So usually, it's about, you know, picking the right writer, picking the right director, pairing them together. Maybe it's the same person, and then that's kind of like the golden child of pitching, right? Hey, we need this amount of money. Here's the vision.
Yeah. And you just go for it.
Yeah. And then you just start shopping around. Yeah. I think for a company like ours that we don't have the seed money for like multi-million-dollar things, but we have the talent, right? And so a lot of the development, and that's part of what I enjoy of working in this company, and I think just in general is like this is the workshopping stage, right? What makes a script, you know, this is good, but it can be here.
It can be better, yeah.
And even if it's not better, even if it's lateral, just for sales purposes, right? Like you include this, it'll be a better sell.
Right. Yeah, it's like packaging. How do you package it?
Yeah.
How do you present it in a way that people are going to be more accepting?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is tough too, because I know sometimes, you know, we want to have we have a certain vision, or like writers often have this is my vision for it. This is how I want it to be. But you're like, but that's not going to sell. And so like, where do you draw that line between like, what do you want and what does the audience want?
That's a great question. And that's a great question for writers, right? Because I think as a writer, and a reason I'm not a writer is I think there's a lot rides on like, this is me. This is 100% pure me on the page, and I don't want anybody to touch that. Yeah. And I completely respect that. And I think I don't know what other reaction to have to that. But I think being a writer that can take notes well, that can be malleable, with still holding the core, I think, the core beliefs or the core motives of a script, that's the writer that gets their stuff made.
Yeah.
Because the thing about Hollywood is everybody wants to feel like they're part of that story.
Yeah.
Or creating that story. You know, EPs that will take, you know, 1/60th of their year for your project still want to feel like they're part of that project. And so that the version of that is a bunch of notes that maybe don't make sense, maybe aren't cohesive to what the vision is, but you need to include a couple of those because that's $3 million from the 9 million that you need, right?
Yeah.
So I think for a writer, the line is like, what are the core? What is the core of the script? What is the core of this message?
Yeah. And then it's like, what are you willing to compromise on the side, on the front?
And you need to have those.
Yeah.
And I think even writing from the perspective of that, of like, I'm ready to let go of these things, can really help you. Because I have seen writers that are like, okay, I'll take your notes. They don't change anything. Bring it back. And it's like, we can tell that you didn't. It becomes really complicated.
Yeah.
You know, contracts are prone to be broke. You know, I'm not gonna say too much about that, but you know, it's not just because you sign something doesn't mean anything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. I think it's definitely a challenge, and I think looking at your work and saying, okay, why? I think also asking like, why are these people making these notes? I think too. Yeah. I think sometimes like when I've gotten notes on things, and if you're not looking at it, okay, where is this person coming from? You know, like what's their perspective?
Right.
That can actually help you to see the notes and understand the reasoning behind the notes better, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I think that the idea of like shoveling through the crap is such a good thing for writers, because I would take everything personally.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, this is an attack on my person and my writing and like everything. But if you really like can water down, or not water down, but I think boil down what the core of like these notes are, like what you were saying, you find that's like, okay, that's pretty practical actually. Yeah. That's pretty an easy fix perhaps.
Right.
And if it is more fundamental, then it's like, where am I coming? You know, I think that the flexibility to be able to do that, to shovel through, you know, the emotions and the ego and the insecurities, and to actually be like, okay, no, I can work with this actually. Yeah. That skill, I mean, I don't really know where you can get it from, but if you have it as a writer that is constantly getting things to executives' desks, I think that's a great skill. Yeah. You know, that's almost like a bigger compliment than being a great like writer. It's like, he's flexible. Yeah. She's flexible. She, you know, whatever it may be, like that malleability to like still stick to your core, but add every cook that needs to be here for this to actually get made. Yeah. It's a good skill.
Yeah, definitely. What are some of your like favorite films or stories? Like when you're looking, like what makes you?
It's an interesting question, because I think a lot of times that's not the question. It's more like, what does your company need? What is your, you know, when you're meeting agents or writers or whatever, what is your company looking for? And it's interesting on a personal note, because it's like, you know, you have your own tastes, you have your own things that you're looking for that move you. For me, things like, you know, I mentioned Dead Poets Society, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know, these dramas that truly move people. Right. For me, I'm a very drama. My favorite director is probably Iñárritu. He did Amores Perros. He also did Birdman, and he's had an extensive career. And you know, he's a very like film student director for sure. I can acknowledge that. But I think for me, it's like, you know, to expand outside, you know, to be so specific about culture, but to be able to tell stories that are so human is such an important thing for me. I think in that list, Ex Machina, being a big sci-fi fan. One, how do you take sci-fi and make it a drama? How do you make it about what is that makes us human at the core? That's really what I love, a good genre script, and a good genre script that boils down to like, this is our humanity, and this is the inner conflict that we have as humans. That to me, no matter the day, will always touch at my core. Yeah. And I think even within a company context or an independent context, I think those are the things that I look for, is provide a great vessel, because I think that's so important to have a great concept of like a sci-fi concept, or a even just a drama that is, you know, kind of boiled down to a couple characters. I recently watched all the Before trilogy. Richard Linklater, you know, he did that in the span of like 30 years or something like that. And when you really boil it down to it, it's like, and you see the credits, it's like Ethan Hawke, I forget her name, but the French woman that plays the counterpart, and Richard Linklater, they all just did the script together. And that was like their project for years and years and years and years. And that's such a great vessel. The concept of just a conversation in a European city. That's so romantic. But also there's a message about love and about connection and about everything underlying it. You can choose anything like that. But if it boils down to that core, like, this is what we want to talk about, but this is the great vessel that we're using, to me is what makes a good story. Yeah. I do feel like I'm constantly operating in both ends, which is a very unique place to be. Because I'm making my own projects, my own short films that I'm producing, and really have a creative say in. At the same time, I'm working for a system, if you want to call it that. You know, it's a system of, you know, this is what sells, this is what doesn't, but this is what moves me. And so it's this constant tug that I feel like one point I'm going to have to choose.
Yeah.
I'm glad I don't have to yet, and like work is flexible enough where I'm able to do my independent like short, and I'm able to like, you know, we had a short just going to a festival in Austin last fall, and so work gave me time off to go to Austin and to actually be present for the festival, and to talk about it and meet people, you know.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm operating both. I think from the independent standpoint, it's a very interesting time because there's just so much. There's a content war.
Yeah.
And fresh voices and fresh perspectives are so coveted.
In demand, yeah.
But at the same time, it feels like most people don't know where to start.
Yeah,
right.
Because there are so many voices. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you go to festivals and it's extremely political.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't have certain themes, then what are you actually? And then, you know, festivals are expensive. Travel is expensive.
Yeah.
So I think it's a challenging time, you know, from a writing perspective. Even if you're a writer, what do you want to? Does it feel like I'm selling out here, or does it feel like I'm more my authentic self here? But this is not going to get made, but this might.
Yeah.
Where's the middle? Of that? And I think I work closely with my writer friends because I'm just so passionate about the process. And I think most good scripts just take time to season into whatever they're going to be.
For sure.
But in a cultural moment and in a business moment where it's like
we need it right now.
Yeah. What do you have? You don't have anything good? Okay, you can go. We'll just take the next person.
Yeah.
Also in the time of like, how much is it going to cost me to do the bare minimum of my concept, of my teaser, of my, you know, I have a pilot, but I want to do 10 minutes of it on my own dime. Is it worth the investment? You know, I think there's a lot of questions around that. How do you become an independent writer and like still own your story, own your content?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I think it's something that needs to be talked about. And I think it's something that other writers need to be talking about. Like, I think it's weird to talk about how much, you know, how much is this? How much is that? How did you find this? But I think it's important. You know, I think we need to there has to be a community aspect to everything that we do. And I think that's going back to like the independent part of what I've been doing in the last couple of years is like, dude, if I didn't have like a family, like the genuine family of like, you're a DP, you guys are writers, you're a director, and we all like love and cherish each other as people, I don't know how you survive this. Because at the end of the day, it's like without people, you're unable to do it. And I do think I'm speaking to the writer specifically because there's this like romanticized notion of the lone wolf writer, right? I'm just gonna do my stories, sit in my typewriter with my morning coffee and my cat, and I'm just gonna write away. I don't need anybody. Yeah. And I think the truth of the matter is like, you're an independent writer in LA and New York and London and any major city that's creating content right now. The best thing you can do is like go out at night and like find people that love story as much as you. Yeah. Because the more people you meet, the more you'll find like out of 10 people, maybe 2 will really line up with what you're trying to say and what you're trying to do. And those are the moments that I think change things for writers. I think the romanticized version of the lone wolf is just not practical. Yeah, you know? I'd agree with that. Yeah. I think it has become so much about community and about people and about people that support each other outside of ego, outside of like, you know, can I give you notes as your friend? Right. Yeah, and not take it personally. Exactly. It's not an attack against you. Yeah. Exactly. So I think that's been interesting. It's like I do find that the people that are just like, no, I'm just gonna write by myself. I'm gonna do this. You know, there's also been a conversation around, I think, post college of like, do I move home or do I stay here with everybody in a very expensive city, in a very demanding city? What is it, like $7? I know for a gallon, like it's insane. Yeah, it's crazy. But why would you stay? Yeah. Right. And my answer to that is like community. 100% meeting the people, finding the people that, you know, it's been interesting being like a Latino and having a lot of like people from different places creating, and so but not really Latinos, and then finding a Latino, and then that opens a whole other network of Latinos, and it's like, we want to create Latino stories, but I still have like my homies here that we're trying to do these stories, and I think that's just beautiful. You know, you're finding your people, you're finding the people that want to create the same stories as you, and I think that that's a key part of being a writer independently, and I think just independent filmmaking in general. I think there is a value to being around this.
Yeah,
paying for that.
Definitely. Yeah, and I also think that's one of those things where if you're not around other people, what are you writing about?
Right.
You know, because you can only write from what you know and your own experiences.
100%.
So if you're only sitting behind your desk writing all the time, like how do you know what you're writing? You know, how do you know?
Yeah, I think you need that real life experience.
Life experience for sure. Yeah, definitely. Great, man. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome. Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys had fun and learned a little bit, and we will see you next time.